My name is Dave Bueller. I've recently been appointed as the new Commissioner of Higher Education in the only state that begins with the letter U, Utah. So it's a great pleasure to be able to moderate this session. I was talking to Paul just before, and he generously offered that all who are here for this session will have free registration and hotel at the next conference, provided that the state of Utah pays for it. So unfortunately, that will not work out. But it was a nice thought, so thank you. We've had some great sessions today and earlier this week. And of course, we know that this session is titled Working with Business Leaders and Responding to Changing Workforce Needs. We've had this topic's been touched on a little bit even earlier today. We all know that the total value of higher education cannot be measured in dollars and cents. How does one quantify what is gained when a student discovers an appreciation of art or music or an understanding of the sweep of history or the development of civilization? Or how does one measure the confidence that a student gains in making a presentation or working with a group of other students or learning to appreciate diverse viewpoints? And these are often part of a college education. We're all aware of that. And yet we also know that the economic value of higher education in America, in America's market economy, is undeniable. In fact, those of us in higher education often stress this as we're seeking funding from our legislatures. We often stress the economic returns. We've all seen surveys of parents and students and the public at large who say a motivation for going to college is the economic return that they will receive, the private good that comes from that. And so we have this balance. We also know that businesses are intensely interested in, sometimes view colleges and universities as the factories that provide their workers. And so they have an intense interest, understandably, in those needs being met. We heard just this morning about unfilled jobs even at a time of unemployment. So all of these issues swirl around us constantly. Now, I know from my own experience in Utah, there's a little bit of a danger of having too much of the market focus, and that some legislators may be tempted to have too narrow a view. I'm sure this wouldn't happen in your states, where they talk about only supporting those programs that they see have an economic return. But it's undeniable that this nexus exists between business and higher education as being mutually supportive and important to us today. I need to excuse one of our panelists who was intended to be here. We've had a change on the program. Charles Kolb was not able to be here because of some weather-related issues getting back and forth to New York today. But we are very pleased to have with us Dr. Nicole Smith. Dr. Smith is a senior economist at the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce, where she leads the center's econometric and methodological work. I practiced that last night to make sure I could get those two big words out in one sentence. I'm used to dealing with legislators and media in very short sound bites, so that's good for me. Her work laid the methodological foundation for the Help Wanted report that projects the demands for occupations in the U.S. economy through 2020. In Utah, we are one of the states that embraced this report and have used it with our governor and our legislature to build support for reaching our big goal, which is even a little more ambitious, partly backed up by their report, of 66% completion by 2020. Other noted publications from the center, of course, are The Uneducated American and What It's Worth. So it's my pleasure now to introduce to you Dr. Nicole Smith.
So good afternoon, everyone. Two things. Really thank you for letting me come here and speak to you about some of the work that we've been doing. I always say I'm an economist, so I spend a lot more time in a dark room with a computer, and it's probably where I'm most comfortable and happy. So standing in front of the podium and talking to people sometimes makes me a little bit nervous, but I'll get over that. And the second thing is, thank you all for being here. When I first saw the agenda and I realized that I was going to be after lunch in the last session, I was like, ooh, on a Friday. And I see all of the rolly bags and people are all ready to get on the plane. I'm always worried, but since you guys are here, that's a sort of great indication. In a previous life, before 100% focusing on research at Georgetown University, I used to actually teach a math class at 7:30 to 9 in the morning on linear algebra. And I actually have, I actually have 20/20 vision. So my glasses are for astigmatism, so I can tell whether the last person, like where Holly is sitting right now, whether her eyes are open, if she's asleep. So, so if you fall asleep, I'm going to know, and I'm going to, quiz you or ask questions later on. But so let's talk about working with business leaders and responding to changing workforce needs. We had an introduction here with David, and it really feels like one of my old faculty meetings. Educators are always a little bit peeved about talking about workforce needs and workforce requirements because they think we do not create the foot soldiers of capitalism. It is not our job to educate people for industry, and it's certainly not our job to just continue reproducing, these workhorses. We are educating people for life. We're educating people for, to be good voters and for all sorts of things. So I always know when I'm in a room with educators when that's the beginning of the conversation. But I think particularly when, the last jobs report gave us 8.3%, and we are still barely above 100,000, maybe 160,000 jobs per month, jobs created per month, and we are still close to about 14 million unemployed, then this is a conversation we have to have. As uncomfortable or as crass as it is, we need to talk about money, we need to talk about employment. When we look at exit surveys and you ask students who are close to graduation or from post-secondary institutions what their goals are, number one is usually to get a job. The outcome of that, of that survey differs a little bit by gender. Men are much more concerned about getting a job that pays a certain amount of money, so they're focused on money. Women are much more concerned about getting a certain types of job in a particular location, so they care about the quality of the job and their quality of life. But we're still really focused on, can I get a job, and what can I do with the skills that I've learned here that make me, better suited to getting a job. So let me just talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we face. We are in a recovery. So I have to say that and sort of roll my eyes and wait for the laughter that came from the front. But we are in a recovery, and as of January 2010, net job growth has actually been positive, and we're a far ways from the 700,000 plus jobs that we lost on a monthly basis in 2009. But recessions actually accelerate the process of skills bias technological change. And what I mean by that is that this economy has been upskilling for quite some time. This is not a new phenomenon that suddenly it seems that employers and jobs are asking for more and more post-secondary education. This has been going on for a while. With the advent of the computer and the personal computer and everybody having a computer at home, and for most of us, it's a prerequisite for us to be doing our jobs, whether your job is a professional job or a technical job. Most people are required to be computer literate. What that has done is that it's forced us to become, or to require more and more post-secondary education and training beyond high school in order to perform in our jobs. So the jobs that remain post-recession are usually the jobs that require more and more post-secondary education and training. And what we've observed is that in an employer's market, employers seem to have the upper hand. Employers are the ones who are asking for particular types of skills and services, and when they have that option, then they are choosing the people who have the skills. And if the marker for skills is this piece of paper that says you can do these things, then they're choosing those who have more and more post-secondary education and training. The industries that grow fastest are the ones that require the highest amounts of post-secondary. We've been underproducing for quite some time, and I know that that's sort of difficult to hear, but Golden and Katz, two noteworthy Harvard economists, have demonstrated that since about the 1980s, and they have this really nice demand-supply interaction model with wages as the outcome, demonstrated that since about 1983, we have been underproducing post-secondary trained workers in the United States, so much so that the wage premium that someone with a college degree earns as a result of having a college degree over those with some high school, that wage premium for full-time, full-year workers is about 84%, and that's remained true even during the recession. I have some pretty graphs to demonstrate that as well. The undersupply of post-secondary educated workers has contributed to inefficiency, inequity, and mismatch. And mismatch is something that you've heard throughout this conference. You've heard about those people standing at the unemployment line and coexisting with, all these job openings that go unfilled. I had an example a few months ago. Deloitte released a report that talked about 600,000 manufacturing jobs in the country going unfilled month after month after month, because the workers that are standing on the unemployment line, the 14 million unemployed workers, the 43% of those who are long-term unemployed, just don't possess the skills to do the job. So there's some sort of disconnect, and we have to address that. So if we continue to underproduce, then the inequality gap, or the distance between the haves and the have-nots, will always continue to increase. So we should care a lot about the relationship between attainment and equality. So this chart shows that what's the change? Well, we know that we're moving away from manufacturing and natural resources to a much more service-based economy. And if I were using ONET, the Occupational Network Database data to show this, and even from the 1800s, you notice that when you look at the percentage of employed, services has the highest percentage of employed workers. Manufacturing is that sort of quadratic equation there, this minus x squared equation. And manufacturing, if you notice, in maybe about 1970 or so, 1970s, it was at its heyday. So the highest proportion of workers were employed in manufacturing around 1970. There's a little bit of an underlying productivity story in this graph as well. So I like to say as a phrase, manufacturing is a victim of its own success. Manufacturing has become so productive that it needs less and less workers to produce its output. And as a statistic, right in 1970, at the peak of that distribution, where there's the turning point, the optimal case, where the first order derivative is zero, haha, it's a little joke. Right at that turning point, at that particular year, every single manufacturing worker contributed about $100,000 to output, to manufacturing output. So that's at the heyday. In 2010, which is the last point of this particular graph, every single manufacturing worker contributed about $300,000 to output. So what this graph actually shows as well is that when manufacturing moved from about 35% of all employment to closer to, 20%, and it's even lower now, it's about 13% now, each worker became 3 times as productive as they were 3 decades ago. So every single worker was much more productive, and that's as a result of increased technology, so that one worker contributes a larger amount to output. So, I'm building a story here that shows that if we become much more of a services-based type of industry, you require more and more post-secondary, then there's some sort of mismatch here, because there's a lot of people with more post-secondary today that are still not being employed. Graphs that are familiar to you, I'm hoping. So there is a hierarchical relationship between attainment and education level. So this should be, I'm just taking you on a journey as to what you know already. Those with high school dropouts, high school graduates, some college, bachelor's, graduate degrees, the more education you get on average, the more you earn. We always separate the graphs for men and women because there's a huge earning disparity for men and women, and when you group them together, we sort of get a false picture of what's the average wage. So we've separated it for men and women. This, of course, is the median wage. It's what's there on an average. And there are always examples of people who earn more, people who earn less. In fact, my center has spent a lot of time pointing out that, there are lots of counterexamples to this story. There are many types of occupations that are less than a BA that earn more than some BAs. There are many types of occupations that are associate degree, or your associate degree can earn more than a BA, or certificate can earn more than a BA. And some examples are in STEM occupations, science, technology, engineering, and math occupations, where a certification in STEM can earn you more than some AA degrees. But this chart is just to show you that over time, the relationship between education and your wage level has always been hierarchical. Here, what's the relationship between education and unemployment? Probably every other day in one of the major newspapers, we have a story about someone with a bachelor's degree who's unemployed. You call them, I guess, my cousin Cindy's story. They show you all these examples, these anecdotes of individuals who are unemployed, and of course they're true and they're valid and valuable stories. But on average, you are 3 times as likely to be unemployed if you only have a high school diploma compared to if you have a bachelor's degree. So if you look at the unemployment rates by education level, the unemployment rate by education level tells you that those with a bachelor's degree, about 4.9% of them are unemployed. And unemployed means that you're actively seeking employment, but you can't find it. So only those actively seeking. And about 15% of those with high school diploma only are unemployed. In this particular chart, we wanted to add the unemployed to the underemployed, because when you speak only of the unemployed in this strict economic sense, you really don't get a clear picture of what people are experiencing. If you are underemployed, it means that you're probably working part-time, and you have this job that's just not fulfilling your education requirement. You would like something else, but you're filling in at the moment because this is the best you can do in this economy, and you're just waiting for something better. So once you add those two, you find higher numbers, but still the relationship is clear. High school dropouts have the highest percentage of unemployed and unemployed workers by education level. And then we go to high school diplomas, some college, and BAs are at the lowest. So there is a benefit to having this BA degree. What type of degree you have also matters, and this is also a difficult conversation for us to have. And I'm really happy that Dave is here, because I've been to Utah with him as well, where when we talk about the type of degree that you have also matters, then there's this natural inclination to say, okay, well then let's only train STEM and healthcare because they pay well. And of course that's also ludicrous, because you cannot make a decision about which types of degrees that you're gonna train for just based, one, on information in the heart of a recession, or recovery, sorry, the heart of a recovery, and two, based on entry-level wage information, because we all know that wages change over the lifetime, over a lifetime. People with liberal arts majors who go on to master's degrees and change their degrees and might decide they want to go to law school, you start off with liberal arts, they substantially increase their earnings potential over time, over their lifetime. So to make that decision just based on how much you earn today is just really short-sighted as well. This is one of my favorite charts, and it's probably because it's new, and we always like stuff that's new. But this chart is showing us what happened during this recession. And if the objective of today's talk is to say, if you don't have some sort of post-secondary education and training beyond high school, then you're essentially screwed, and this graph sort of helps you with that. So let's discuss why. The first point on the graph is January 1989. 1989, so that's the first point. And it goes to 2012. And so the vertical shaded lines are the recessions, the 01 recession, the beginning and the end of that recession there, and the one that happened right after, right at the end of 01. And then we have our recession that started in December of 2007, larger recession. But what this graph demonstrates is the light blue line are those with high school or less, look at the drop that happens in that line. There's a steep incline that moves the percentage change in employment level from -4% to -14%. So it's huge losses for people who have high school or less. So if you just look, I wish I had a pointer. Do I have a pointer on this? Oops. Oh, I pressed the wrong thing for the pointer. Okay. So here's my pointer. If you can see this, huge decline for those with high school or less. And then when you have a bachelor's degree or better, yes, they lost jobs during the recession, but in the recovery period, which we're defining from the first set of positive job creation from January 2010, all of the jobs created seem to have gone to these people. So the types of jobs that are created are going to these people with a bachelor's degree or better. Some college, associate's degree, and we always say it's a mixed bag because it's hard. I mean, it's really hard to unravel what's in some college, whether it's 1 or 2 courses of college, whether you have enough to actually count as some sort of certification, a bachelor's degree. They're all wrapped up in there. But we've also created jobs for those people in the post-recession period. It's those with a high school or less that the jobs have disappeared. So when we say, the jobs that have gone are gone and are not coming back, the jobs that are gone post-recession are gone and are not coming back, we are essentially talking about these high school jobs. I don't know what happened to my pointer, but we're essentially talking about these high school jobs that are gone and are not coming back and are being replaced by jobs that require more and more post-secondary education and training. I want to talk a little bit about the hollowing out. You heard about that? The hollowing out, hourglass economy? Oh, okay. So there's a bunch of economists that say that we're losing the middle class, that we're hollowing out. There's no more middle. And we just have an upper class economy with people with high levels of education and high levels of earnings, and we have a lower economy with low levels of education and low levels of earnings, and then the middle is hollowing out. Well, those people that focus on that are essentially telling us that the economy has changed away from manufacturing. So manufacturing jobs, which offered high wages to people with high school only, those jobs have gone. Those jobs have gone and are being replaced. I mean, manufacturing is growing, don't get me wrong. Manufacturing is growing, but it's being replaced by manufacturing jobs that require more and more post-secondary education. So the types of jobs that come back, even in those industries, are requiring more education here. So the hollowing out story, I think it has to do with one of what is the education level required for you to be successful. It's my other fancy graph. So this particular chart shows you what happened post-recession by education level again. And so we have a period of the recession. Let's see if I get this. Okay, so this is the recession, and this is the recovery. And look at what happens to losses for people with high school or less. Huge losses. They call it the man session, right? You've heard that. They've said it's a man session. The men are the ones who've lost the most jobs. Well, if most of those jobs were in construction, then, a lot of men are the ones who work in construction, production occupations, manufacturing. That's where we have the huge losses during the recession. Post-recession for high school, it's been weak. We continue to lose jobs, and it's just faltered off in the end. What about those in the middle? In the middle, it's the red line here. Still a lot of job losses, and their job losses came a little bit after, if you notice, a little after the job loss started for those in the middle. As those at the bottom, then we have job losses. And there's still some amount of recovery here. But the true growth has been for those with a bachelor's degree or better. Look at how people with bachelor's degrees have fared during the recession. Yes, there's losses. There we go. But then in the recovery period, people with a bachelor's degree or better have gained 2 million jobs in this recession, in this recovery. 2 million jobs have been gained here, 1.6 million for those in the middle, and 230,000 with those high school or less. So this very compact chart with a lot of information, it just shows us what happens in the post-recession period, and that the types of jobs that manufacturers, the types of jobs that industry is creating are jobs that require more and more post-secondary. Well, why do we still continue to have this mismatch? And just if you ignore that pie chart for a minute, I'll explain it because the numbers might be small to read. Why do we continue to have this mismatch? We continue to have this mismatch because, and first let's define the mismatch. The mismatch occurs when we have huge amounts of unemployed people coexisting with jobs that are created but go unfilled. Mismatch can be geographical, so let's talk about that part of it. It could be geographical. You might be living in, in Washington, D.C., and there's a job in Iowa, but you, for whatever reason, and there's various reasons, might not be able to relocate. The collapse in the housing market was part of the reason for that. I mean, you can't exactly get up and sell your house and move to another state if your house is underwater. So part of the story of mismatch is geographical. But a large part of the story on mismatch as to why people cannot find a job is actually skills-based. You just do not have the skill. So this chart, this pie chart is going to show that if we look at the nation's entire education and training budget, all the money allotted to education and training, about 65% is spent outside of the formal education. We have employer-based informal training, and that's 303 million there. Oh, that's billion. Employer-provided informal training, so that's this gray section here. We have industry-based certifications, and certain jobs require certifications more than others. Mostly, you find a lot of them in STEM. My favorite is the MCSE, Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer. A lot of the healthcare jobs require all of these certifications. Apprenticeships programs, here's a good 6 billion. Apprenticeship programs in the United States are about, let's see, just maybe 2% of all workforce employment. It's roughly about 2% if you compare those people in apprenticeships to the actual size of the workforce. What's peculiar about our apprenticeship program as well is that the average age of the apprentice is now 27 in the United States. So apprenticeship age has actually risen. Then you have employer-based, employer-provided formal training, so formal classroom training. You have public job training in 16 billion, and then you have the colleges and universities and the four-year privates that four-year publics, four-year privates that we're a part of here, and the two-year publics and two-year privates. So here's where, we spend most of our time. But the entire education and training discussion is much larger than this. So we find that employers seem to be expecting graduates to hit the ground running. They want you to get your diploma and to walk into the job and be able to perform adequately in the job. But of course, that's unrealistic because there's certain types of industry-specific skills and corporate culture and that sort of thing that you can only learn when you're actually on the job. So as much as they keep complaining, that the students that we get aren't good enough, and they're trying to really relieve a lot of their own responsibility in training. They're trying to push that into the four-year institutions and the two-year institutions. But there's still something, I think, as much, we don't want to have this conversation. We hardly want to have this conversation about what happens when you graduate. Should we tie funding to employment outcomes? This is a conversation we've been having as well. And this issue is, and in Patrick's previous segment, in the last hour, he was talking about aligning K-12 to post-secondary, all the way to UI wage records to be able to trace exactly that, to be able to say, once you've graduated from this institution, where do you work? Well, we don't know where you work. We actually know which industry you work in, and we'll be able to tell how much you earned if you're in state in that industry. So, there are some characteristics of mismatch where employers seem to be asking a lot for soft skills, communication skills, networking skills. They keep saying that people remain insufficient. When you look at the characteristics of the mismatch, 5.6 million have been unemployed for 6 months or more. 43% of those have been, 43% of the unemployed have been unemployed for 6 months or more. They're disproportionately minority workers. They're more likely to be male and significantly more likely to have high school as their highest level of education. So just when you look at those people who are long-term unemployed, the conversation we have about the lines that stand, right next to these jobs, these are the characteristics. So how have we failed them, and what do we do to make sure that we can, connect them to jobs? Well, it's a combination of what happens in the education system and as well as the training system here. So if they can connect to the job, then they can, we can try to figure out what types of skills they're missing. There are a couple of reports that have, that are released over and over again that talk about soft skills versus hard skills. In fact, they tell you that the skill match depends upon both non-cognitive and cognitive policies. So you need to have knowledge, skills, and abilities to do the job. But then there's also a sort of combination of interests and values of the individual and of the occupation that makes you successful in that job. Just again, in terms of what's been happened historically, physical and mechanical skills are on the decline, so that's again part of the story about the loss in manufacturing and the growth of services. And if you look at, this is ONET data, this is occupational network data, which gives us really detailed information on the types of knowledge, skills, abilities, values, interests, tasks required to do a job. But if you pick certain physical, mechanical skills over time, equipment maintenance, mechanical, multi-limb coordination, repairing, trunk strength, and all those things that used to be really important for you to perform your job in the past are now declining in requirement. In fact, I can change my own tire. A few years ago, I would always call in, somebody with brawn to do that, but you don't have to do that anymore. You just crank it up and you change it. We've actually, and that's just my little anecdote to make sure people are awake, but what happens here is that, physical and mechanical skills are no longer required because we have a lot of equipment that can replace those tasks. Cognitive skills are on the rise. So critical thinking, English language, mathematics, near vision, oral expression, that sort of thing, those are on the rise. It's imperative that we develop curricula that, incorporate all of these in some masked way to make sure that our students are in fact developing these types of skills, because this is what's required for them to be able to perform adequately on their job. And this again is using ONET skills. Apparently we didn't need so much cognitive skills in the 1800s as we do now. So why do we lose these jobs? Well, here's why, and this is actually a sort of summarization of another economist called Robert Murnane and Levy, where they've been saying, look, if the skill is routine, it's repetitive, procedural, for example, bookkeepers, assembly line workers, then it's possible that those are just going to be substituted. You're just going to be offshore, substituted, you're going to find somebody else. If once you can devise ways of trying, it's routine, anyone can learn it, we can lose those types of jobs easily. Non-routine cognitive or high skills, such as problem-solving skills, mental flexibility, abstract skills, scientists, attorneys, managers, doctors, then they have strong complementarity to them, so we don't lose them. And then the non-routine manual, low skills, that are adaptable. It's possible that we don't really lose them as well. They might stay on because you're going to need these individuals, truck drivers, security guards, waiters. So the idea here is, throughout time in this economy, we've been moving away from physical and mechanical skills towards these cognitive skills. And those tests that are easily repeatable are the ones that we lose to offshoring. So what's our responsibility? We have to impact those at risk. So it is, we have to try to figure out which are the groups of people who are most likely to fall in this education donut hole, the ones that are most likely, as we've defined, to be unemployed for 6 months or more, the ones who are having the most difficulty attaching to the workforce, the ones that just don't have the ability to, even after 6 months or 12 months, become long-term unemployed. So the first generation college attendees. The high school to college pipeline is something we've spoken about before, and some of the previous sessions listened to. Stan Jones was talking about the abysmal graduation rates in high school and the degree of remediation that's required for many of these students to go to college and to complete college successfully. And I've just shown you a bunch of pictures and charts and diagrams that tell you how important it is for you to have a college education, to exist in the society, to become to have access to the middle class, and to connect to one of these jobs. So we have to strengthen that pipeline. And graduation rates remain a challenge, and this is graduation rates across the board. And there's certain locations where it's even more troublesome. Reduced need for remediation, because there's so much data that shows that once these students get caught in the remediation spiral, that they're much less likely to graduate. And finally, the one that is, I guess of most importance to me is to improve workforce preparedness. I've sat at many meetings where we've had conversations about just exactly how we connect workforce to higher ed to make sure that we are exchanging information. The Business Higher Ed Forum is a great example that I like to think of, because they spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to ensure through internships and that sort of thing that many of the students who graduate from higher ed or community colleges and foreign institutions actually are able to perform in their job and to have the skills required. And finally, we have to leverage resources between public and private sectors to support education excellence. I just wanted to end on one note, and you'd be happy that we're going to end a couple of minutes early, I guess, before you ask questions. But I wanted to end on a note that we have spent some time looking at gainful employment. And gainful employment legislation has, I guess, rightfully or wrongfully, had targeted the two-year institutions. It's targeted the two-year private. And in some ways it's been struck down, because we ended up with legislation that essentially had no legs. But gainful employment legislation really opens up the discussion for what are the rest of us going to do about this? I mean, if you have programs, we have to really evaluate. If you have programs where the students leave, and then we are not able to track what happens to them later on, or when we track what happens to them later on, we find that they're not able to attach themselves adequately to the workforce, then we really need to reevaluate what's happening with that curriculum and what's happening with our ability to graduate students who can in fact be contributing members of society. So that's the end of my discussion, and if you have any questions, I'm open to discussion.